So what do I need to talk to you about? I need to talk to you about the Dan Crenshaw situation. As many of you know, he sent me a cease and desist, threatened to sue me. I made a rebuttal. I invited him on the show. Everybody that's been on this show since around episode 10 has signed a release form.
And now he's making claims, false claims, that again are easily disprovable. And I will show you the evidence of the emails back and forth between us. You never sent us anything to sign. Nothing. Still want to do this or not, buddy? Or are you too scared?
I just have to say, Americans are the ones that are having the price to pay throughout the entire debacle between Shawn Ryan and Dan Crenshaw, the Congressman. To give the major backstory of this is essentially Shawn Ryan made some statements on his podcast that Dan Crenshaw didn't like, sent a cease and desist, that he was going to sue for defamation. We're going to actually handle this seal to seal, and we're going to go on a podcast. And the American people wanted that because the major question was, how are so many congressmen able to afford lavish lifestyles, yet they're making $170,000, $200,000 a year? There's no way these people are not doing some kind of insider trading. Now, that date was supposed to be today, and that podcast has not happened. I'm going to break down everything about this because there are some critical thoughts that I think the public is not asking about it. We're going to break down each of their statements, go through the email receipts that Dan Crenshaw has actually discovered on his Instagram and shown out there. And we're going to show you kind of behind the scenes some clues I think we could gather from this. Here's Shawn Ryan's show and what he says about it.
Whenever I make a mistake, I take ownership of it, and I apologize to those that were affected, whether I like them and respect them or not, because that's the right thing to do, and that's what a man does. And so what do I need to talk to you about? I need to talk to you about the Dan Crenshaw situation. As many of you know, he sent me a cease and desist, threatened to sue me. I made a rebuttal. I invited him on the show. Then he challenged me. I accepted. I said, okay, perfect. January 2nd. To come on this show, you have to sign a release form. Everybody that's been on this show since around episode 10 has signed a release form. President Trump, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Joe Kent, lots of very important people, much more important than a congressman, have signed that release form. Everybody that has been interviewed in the new studio has signed the exact same release form. So, Dan Driscoll, Secretary of the Army, signed the exact same release form. Mike Waltz, former National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the UN, signed the exact same release form just a few days ago. Dan and his attorneys, they don't want to sign the release form.
To give context, because this matters, he's saying there's been several different iterations of the release form of what's there, and I want you to kind of understand there have been changes. And probably there were some changes, is what I would assume, if you're going to have the president on. I don't think every NDA is going to be exactly the same. That's my personal opinion, not fact. I don't know that. But he goes on to why Dan Crenshaw does not want to sign this.
They want special concessions. We sent them that release form on December 26th. They then sent a bunch of red lines. We said, we're not making any special circumstances or modifying our release form for the congressman. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. But we will make some special concessions for his protection on another document and send that over. Well, they have yet to sign either one of those documents. I have to have those documents signed to interview somebody. Everybody's done it.
Now, the reason for this is Shawn Ryan right now is trying to protect his 5.57 million subscriber channel, plus all the money, sponsors, all that stuff. Like, he's making a business risk decision by having an NDA in place, of course, in order to have this go on and ensure he's not going to be sued or liable for whatever any of his guests do. That's going to be very important later on in this episode.
They are going to wait until close of business on New Year's Eve to send some type of a communication in hopes that we don't get it, because who the hell is checking their email at 10 o'clock at night on New Year's Eve. Well, guess what? We get an email at 10 o'clock at night from Dan's campaign manager on New Year's Eve, where the next day is a national holiday and nobody's behind their desk. And the next day, it's game day, it's interview time. They said, we've booked the hotel that you've recommended. Will somebody be there to pick us up? There was no mention of the release forms. So here's what's going to happen. They're going to come here and they're going to make a big stink on how I didn't interview them and how I was scared to interview them or whatever, but they're hiding behind the paperwork. And so now, this is what's going to happen. Dan, I am now redacting my invitation for you to come on my show. I gave you the opportunity to be a man. You didn't take it. I gave you the opportunity to speak to 5.5 million people and prove to them that you are not insider trading. That's a fucking gift, I might add. A gift that not very many people get, and you turned it down.
Now, I do agree with Shawn on this. It is a gift. It is definitely a huge platform. It showed to be very impactful during the last presidential election as well. And we're sitting here, and the only criticism I have is because we need to have continued commitment to exposure of this or open conversation, where I think redacting it is kind of showing unwillingness. And you are giving leverage to Dan Crenshaw, which these people, the way they operate, are looking for any way to take advantage of some little thing you say like this. And that does happen here.
When we talked to your campaign manager, they said, oh, we send a lot of these letters out, and usually this takes care of it. Now, I told everybody, about a week, 2 weeks ago, this is what you do, Dan. You're a bully. You bully people into submission. Anybody that scrutinizes you, you send them a nastygram, and you threaten to sue them, and that works. Unfortunately, it didn't work on me. And so for my audience, what I've done is I've just exposed how much of a bully Dan Crenshaw is. So from now on, if you want to scrutinize Congressman Dan, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get a harshly written letter threatening to sue you if you don't take the content down and make a public apology. And then that's it, because Dan doesn't have the courage to actually do anything else. So don't worry. You're not going to get sued. You've been exposed, Dan. Bye.
Unfortunately, while I appreciate his transparency, I don't think this changes many people's ideas of Dan Crenshaw. And you're going to see that in the comments. We're going to cover that. We already know he's bullied his way through things to get where he's at. He's stepped over every seal in the book right now. So there is that. We already know that. So I want to get new information we don't have. And again, the American people, I think, need to hear this. And people do come up with great solutions for this because I think it's important. Where this person, Tony Boyer 2850, says, now interview the people who he screwed over. And then someone says, the boys at 6 won't sign the paperwork. And lastly, this person, Oblate 2022, says, voters in Crenshaw District, you know what to do, vote him out. To be honest, I think that's the only way you would ever actually get a lawsuit from Dan Crenshaw, is if videos like this and exposure happens that gets him out of office, where that would be the last-ditch effort to, in order, obtain any leverage financially, morally, ethically, whatever he wants to think he's on. But there is that. Now, Dan Crenshaw has exposed his side of the story of this and has shown emails, apparently, that are from the lawyers that were talking to make this happen.
So, of course, Shawn Ryan is backing out. A lot of people said he would. I thought he would. And now he's making claims, false claims, that, again, are easily disprovable. And I will show you the evidence of the emails back and forth between us. Shawn, giving you one last chance. I can still make my flight to Nashville, but I've only got maybe half an hour to do so. You know very well that we agreed to your terms on Monday. We have all the email evidence to prove it. The only special privilege that was asked for was actually from you guys, from your attorney. You asked that we waive any right to hide behind the what's called the speech and debate clause. And in Congress, if you make a speech on the floor, you can't be sued for it. Of course, it doesn't even apply here, but we said, sure, we'll sign it. Just send us the updated language. Your lawyer said on Monday, we'll send the updated language. You never sent us anything to sign. Nothing. You claimed that we wanted all this other special treatment. The only thing we took out of the original contract was liability waivers on ATVs, because we're not going to ride any ATVs. Okay, and then you guys freaked out about that, and so we said, fine, we'll do it your way.
There are some people that I've read are speculating like they didn't want any footage of them being buddy-buddy, anything that could kind of expose if they ever did ride an ATV. But I'm also thinking, is this a play to make Shawn Ryan pay more for legal fees to go back and forth in the hourly charges to make sure something like this happens? It would not shock me if somebody was trying to waste time to charge somebody else more legal fees just in the sake of trying to whittle them down, essentially.
On Monday, we agreed to everything you wanted. Everything. On Monday. Don't try to confuse people by talking about some email on New Year's Eve. That was from my campaign manager to your producer, just checking in, saying, hey, we're good to go. We've got our flights. We're ready. That was all that email was. Don't pretend like that was some last minute thing. You guys said on Monday you'd send us the updated stuff. We said we'd agree to it. I have a flight to Nashville this afternoon coming out of Virginia Beach. Still want to do this or not, buddy? Or are you too scared? Maybe you looked into all the facts and realized they weren't really on your side. I don't know. Let's figure it out. That was the whole point. Out.
Now, I want to read the comments because there are third parties to this that Dan Crenshaw tried to manipulate, in my opinion, of how this was played out. So the first one was Jameson Travels, which, by the way, has a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers here, where he cites a video yesterday he posted where Dan Crenshaw tried to reach out to him for an interview. We're going to talk about that side. But the comments don't really seem to be in Dan Crenshaw's favor either. Emil here says, no one believes you, Dan. You're in damage control. If you live in TX2, vote for Dan's primary opponent, Steve Toth, in the Republican primary on March 3rd, 2026. Someone said, what did your boys at 6 have to say? And lastly, this person, Texas Garden Guy, says, it's crazy that it was easier to get Hunter Biden on the Shawn Ryan show than Dan Crenshaw, which I would say is crazy because they both sound like they lean in the same direction, politically speaking. They both are religious people from what I've seen. They both were Navy SEALs. They both have seen combat. Like, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, duh, you guys should be able to talk to each other. But Hunter Biden came on, but he didn't. That's a very good, valid point. Now, I don't want to lose you guys in the details, but you guys want proof, you want evidence, you want the facts, you want to see exactly date, timestamps, so people aren't just throwing information at you. And that's why I think it's important to go through all these emails. Now, on his Instagram, Dan Crenshaw writes, Shawn Ryan just backed out of our highly anticipated interview scheduled for tomorrow. He claims it's because we wouldn't sign his waiver form. Once again, he's lying, and I've got the evidence. Swipe for the emails between our attorneys. He also shows here, first of all, I had a flight booked to Nashville tonight. We are fully committed. Here's the flight purchase. Now, obviously, I'm going to assume this is correct. It was confirmed on the 15th of December. According to this, I don't think a plane ticket's that deep of a commitment for somebody that makes as much as Dan Crenshaw does on top of what Shawn Ryan's alleging that he's making millions off of insider trading and things like that. I'm not going to bore you reading line for line. I'm going to give you the synopsis of each email. So the first email happens on the 11th. Timothy Parlatore is the lawyer for Shawn Ryan, where he sets it up and he's like, hey, there's no time limit for this interview. There's no subject off the table. We just want this actually to be what it is. We want to do this interview. Now, from some of the receipts, it does appear they circle back to Dan Crenshaw and they're like figuring out what's going to happen. We don't have every single one that's here. However, it is clear some of the concern is from Dan Crenshaw and the possible editing of what could have happened. Now, that's because they are very clear. They do not want this chopped up. It's obvious if you watch Shawn Ryan, there are multiple angles, so there is that. But they want a master copy of what is happening. And I mean, I'm like, why not just have Dan Crenshaw bring his own film people too? You know, or just say, hey, it's agreed we will receive the raw file from this camera that has both of us in it after this entire thing. And just so you know, the exact details of what they were trying to agree upon was pretty fair. because Timothy Parlatore says, I spoke with my client as to editing. Here's what they were able to do. They believe that they have the capability to broadcast a single camera, wide angle live on Patreon. Your client team can take that live broadcast video from there. They plan to edit and put out the clean multi-camera version within 24 hours. This should take care of all of your concerns about the live editing as well as edited previews. Let me know if this satisfies all of your concerns and let me know about the time limit issue. And another email follows that where Dan Crenshaw's team is essentially like, we can't have unlimited time because we have another flight. They have to meet troops and things like that. Now, on the 22nd, the lawyers for Dan Crenshaw write to Timothy Parlatore, the lawyer for Shawn Ryan, and they're like, hey, do you have standard agreement of how this is going to be? Who's going to do the work here, essentially, to make sure this makes it into our clause? The 23rd, Tim writes back, says, got it, we'll send you a draft. Then on the 26th, they asked for the draft again from Timothy Parlatore. Then in refute of that, Timothy Parlatore, the lawyer for Shawn Ryan, says, yeah, we're going to send over the same things we always give everybody. This is our NDA, this is what we do, and we're going to just move forward with that because everybody signs this. Now, this is where the legal jargon gets really interesting, and that's because Shawn Ryan, as a businessman running the Shawn Ryan show, is trying to protect them. And this is why it's so important, is because he wants specific language in this document to actually portray how it's going to go down. Because when you have a podcast like Shawn Ryan, whoever you bring on, you do not want any liability for what they say or what they do. Now, it is true that there are some protections for congressmen that are doing their functions as congressmen that are protected, and they cannot be charged for those things in an ability to not be hindered. And again, they cite through the ATV being an issue. They cite through like he's not doing anything in his official capacity as a congressman, so this should not be an issue. We can remove those things. And as a response, Shawn Ryan and his team have said, we're not doing any red lines. We're going to make sure this continues forward. Now, because of this, Dan Crenshaw's lawyer is like, wait. You're only going to have Dan Crenshaw on if he agrees to take all legal liability of possibility of being sued. That's because they say, just to clarify, are you saying that Mr. Ryan will only have Representative Crenshaw on his program if Crenshaw agrees to, quotations, defend and indemnify Mr. Ryan's company, quotations, against any and all claims or expenses or whatever kind of arising out of or resulting from any claim of a third party related to Representative Crenshaw's presence in the studio and activity occurring on the property? His team then writes back, if Mr. Crenshaw comes in and decides to lie and defame a third party, who then files a lawsuit? Then yes, we expect him to defend and indemnify the company. This is the same for every guest, but is particularly important for someone like Crenshaw, who we know going in is not an honest person. They want it in writing. They want protection. They want to know that bringing Crenshaw on is not going to be all of these liabilities. You realize they're trying to let the cat out of the bag. They're trying to expose fraud. They're trying to do that. And when you do that and you shake the cage and you rattle it, you realize what's going to happen. People are going to get lawyers and come after you. I'm sorry, but an email agreement of course we would make sure we handle legal fees if something came against Shawn Ryan. Nope. I don't agree with that. I don't care about an email between two lawyers. I care about a signature on a document. I care about both parties being involved in that signature and agreement. I care about the truth. And you as Americans should as well. And unfortunately, this is exposing all of that. And this is where the tide turns. This is where Timothy Parlatore, the lawyer for Shawn Ryan, essentially is like, wait, I'm not liking where this is going. You're looking at us to remove a lot of high top end coverage from liability to have you on, where we know that you've screwed a lot of people over. And now we don't know if we want to do this. And what they say here is they know that Dan Crenshaw is not acting in his capacity as a congressman being on this podcast. He's acting on his own accord, whatever legal jargon you have to say there. Dan Crenshaw then cries about it and says, I'm being treated differently. And that's not necessarily not true. I mean, it's true, but it's not true. I mean, I would hope that most guests, and I would say this is maybe a top line edit change to 2026 operations, is you might need to say we do change some of the NDA language depending on who is going to come in here, because every guest could bring new liabilities with them. In response, the lawyers for Dan Crenshaw are like, it was so broad because the language was just saying that if Dan Crenshaw even showed up and they got sued for some reason, he would cover that. I'm like, well, I don't think that should be an issue unless you think Dan Crenshaw is going to get sued for random things that, just showing up merely to a podcast. Like, that must mean you have some worries about this. Then they essentially go back and forth, and they're like, hey, are you going to send it? Are you not going to send it? Like, come on, send it. But it's like every email is like a day apart. They're fighting over verbiage. It could have been over a phone call, but it's the lawyers involved, so no one's going to do anything over the phone. They're actually going to wait until they can get emails, because we all know this is the political game they're going to play. So they can do exactly this. At this point, the lawyers are pissed off at each other, and it's not looking good. That's because Timothy Parlatore is annoyed of all this little banter back and forth about specific words and verbiage, and he's essentially saying in this email, like, if your client was serious, Dan Crenshaw, I would already have it signed. We'd already have it confirmed. We're looking at this email from the 1st of January, the day before the podcast is supposed to happen. And the lawyers from Dan Crenshaw are like, are you seriously saying that we should have done the work for you on the exact language? And he's like, well, you're so specific about it. It's like, what do you want it to say? I'm submitting things, you're redlining things, you're sending it back, you're giving me criticism, but you're not actually doing it. And eventually, Timothy Parlatore is pissed off. He said, my client's fully informed on everything. I presume your client is informed that in addition to having you send the absolute worst defamation demand letter I've ever read, you failed to get him to sign the waiver. Now we're going to circle back to the Jameson travel situation, because he posts the email he got from Dan Crenshaw requesting an interview. Has over 1 million views on that video alone, plus almost 1 million on the secondary of that follow-up story. So, yeah. But Dan Crenshaw seemed to have not wanted to continue with that, and it's fallen on deaf ears. And that's where you see right now where you've got Jameson Travels in the comments saying, like, let's talk. Like, can somebody do something? I would say, if anything, Jameson is less armed trying to attack anybody, but he is wanting the same as me of wanting the American people to know exactly why congressmen are so rich. Now, while he cannot talk about every congressman that's ever been alive or filled the position or whatever else, talking about his own finances, but again, that would open him up to liability. I believe this interview was going to be set up to try and help buffer and shape the narrative of Dan Crenshaw, and knowing he could more so manipulate probably this situation better than he could with a Shawn Ryan. Shawn Ryan has a whole team. He has legal experts. He's got a lawyer. He's got PR people. He's got a team around him, probably much bigger than Jameson Travel. So I'm going to summarize my own thoughts here and say, I don't think Dan Crenshaw will ever actually go to court with Shawn Ryan for a few reasons. In his own comments, people are already like, we don't trust you. And that's on his own platform. Secondary, he has no reason to put himself on that chopping block of liability. And 3, he would lose favoritism even more. 4, he doesn't have any actual threat against him by anyone else besides just public scrutiny right now, unless he's at the whim of losing his position, which essentially I don't think he is going to try and sue Shawn Ryan unless that was the case. Unless Shawn Ryan did such a massive hit piece on him and had damning evidence against him that could be false, I don't think that would be the case. But let me know what you guys think about all this back and forth lawyering and the shutdown of the Shawn Ryan interview with Dan Crenshaw.